Hello, Miss Aronson. It's a pleasure to talk to you today. So before we start, can you please briefly introduce yourself and some of your responsibilities?
Yeah, so it's very nice to talk to you as well, Richard. So I am a school psychologist. So what that entails, I primarily work with a lot of the special education students on our campus, but I also provide counseling and behavioral support to these students as well. But I am also a resource to anyone on the campus, really.
In your role, do you deal with students' mental health a lot?
I do. So particularly working in a high school, mental health is a pretty big concern at all times for a lot of students. And so I do some counseling with students and we work on coping skills a lot. But I do see a lot of students struggling with mental health, whether they seek support for it or not. Sometimes we can see that they need it, but they're not necessarily open to help at that time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And can you explain maybe what are some of the situations or circumstances where students may need the help, but they're too reluctant to ask for it?
Yes. So, particularly, I'm at a high school in Southern Orange County, Irvine. It is a very high achieving area. So a lot of students, I think, are just very focused on academics, and that's just kind of all that they're thinking about. They're not necessarily thinking about the other aspects of them as a human, and especially their mental health. And so then I talk to students, and they're experiencing a lot of academic stress, but then they're comparing themselves to other students and feeling like they shouldn't be feeling the negative feelings that they are experiencing. So a lot of times those students are pretty reluctant to seek help because they feel like they should be able to handle it on their own, because from their perspective, it appears like everyone else is handling it on their own. So they don't want to necessarily seem different. That's a big thing, is kind of the stigma around not wanting to appear like you need help. And just trying to act like, everything's all okay at all times.
So what does that look like, for example?
Yeah, so I would say, I think of a few specific examples of students that I do counseling with that are taking a lot of AP courses, for example. And they are now struggling because, these are a lot of expectations on them that they didn't previously have. And so they're used to kind of performing at a certain level. And now with these higher expectations, they're not able to meet the same level of standard that they believe that they should. And so then students don't really want to accept help for that, because they're comparing themselves to all of these students who are doing well and not needing that support. A lot of kids, I notice, they're just very focused on academics. They think that if they can, do well and just get through, that somehow, magically their mental health will improve, but it's really not that simple.
Yeah. Do you think mental health and academics often go hand in hand, or is there kind of a relationship in how to succeed in both of them?
Yeah, so I think they are related, but not necessarily have to be related. I think just for students in school, they do go hand in hand. And I do talk to a lot of students who unfortunately emphasize the academics, like I said, not as much as the mental health piece. But it is possible to be more well-rounded and succeed in both areas. But unfortunately, it does take a lot of work in the area of mental health to improve and succeed in that. Whereas I think these students are used to just trying to focus on academics. And so kind of adding this mental health factor, I think, is pretty daunting and kind of throws them off a little bit.
Yeah, so like you said, it's kind of a challenge to handle both of them at the same time. And you also mentioned that students also have to put in maybe some additional work to improve their mental health. So what does that work look like?
Yeah, so that's kind of the tough part about mental health, is it is primarily focused on the person themselves. And so specifically in high school, once students are older, I'm able to provide coping strategies and talk therapy, but it is really on the student to kind of put in that work to implement their coping skills and practice them and use the strategies that I'm teaching them and we're working on. But it's really on them to actually use that in their day-to-day life. And I know that again, is really tough for some students, and they want it to be easier than that they can just come in here and we can talk and then they'll feel better. But unfortunately, it takes a bit of work.
Yeah, so can you share some of the coping strategies and skills that you use with your students?
Yeah, so I always personally, I start off like telling students about my own coping strategies. So those are like taking a walk outside, just deep breathing, and writing things down. But obviously different things work different for everyone. So I do have actually like a big list of coping strategies with like things like listening to music, progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing, like box breathing, and different types of mindfulness as well. But it depends on the student and what works best for them. So I have some students who, as a coping mechanism, they kind of daydream. And while that might not be the typical thing that I would suggest, if that works for them and that makes them feel better in the moment, then I feel that that's beneficial, and I would absolutely encourage that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. And so you also mentioned how some of these coping strategies kind of needs engagement for them to be effective, and it's up to the student on their own to be able to practice these skills. So is there any other like tips or strategies you use to try to keep the students engaged in these practices?
Yeah, so I like to try to engage in the coping skills with the students, because I think that that's very important to start to, kind of do it really accurately. For example, if we're doing deep breathing, a lot of students, because I work with like teenagers, might not understand how deep breathing necessarily works, and how it can benefit them. But there's like different forms of deep breathing, like box breathing, like different ways to reset kind of your nervous system with breathing. And so we practice those a lot together to ensure that they are doing them correctly in their own practice. But I provide a lot of reminders. And so unfortunately, I can't make these students do these things on their own. But I feel like my job is just to continually show them the benefits of what could happen and reminding them that it is hard, but it gets easier over time.
Yeah, so do you think an app, for example, could be beneficial in maybe sending students reminders when they're at home or trying to keep up with engagement?
Yeah, actually I do. I absolutely do. I think that is one of the harder parts of providing like mental health support in the school system is it's focused on what's happening at school and when the student is in school. It doesn't necessarily extend to weekends, holiday breaks, summer breaks. So I do think that reminder would be really great. And just also to show the student that like we are still there trying to provide support, even though we might not be able to be there in person for them at that time.
And do you think there are some other mental health challenges and struggles that you've noticed that maybe less discussed about?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of mental health challenges that students are very weary of discussing and being open about. And I think it is a lot, due to the stigma that unfortunately still surrounds mental health. But I think I would say what I see the most is anxiety. But it's interesting because a lot of students also, I think due to the stigma, don't fully understand or are aware that that's what they're experiencing. but they will come in and speak to me and kind of tell me these markers of anxiety, such as like feeling tingly or like warm in the body. And so I think that that's also part of the issue of why it's kind of underlying, and part of the reason that these students struggle to speak about them is because they're not even so sure about it themselves.
Yeah, so how do you think we can try to destigmatize and better educate, especially younger people, about some of these potential signs of mental health?
Yeah, I think honestly, education is one of the main ways to destigmatize things, and it is important to start at a young age. I think almost, asking students to identify how that might feel for them at times. So obviously not all students are going to experience maybe depression. And even the students who do, they're not going to experience it to the same severity. And it's not going to look the same for everyone. But I think helping to destigmatize it could be kind of asking students to identify some of maybe the symptoms of these things that they feel in themselves, just so they can understand that we all do experience some mental health challenges and struggles, and we could all use help at some point. And so nobody should be ashamed because we've all been there.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing and for your time today.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure interviewing you.
Thank you so much, Richard. It has been a pleasure talking with you.